And on this stage, we are going to be talking about effective email marketing. And that's going to be moderated by our very own Gali Arnon, who's our CMO, and Miles Klieger, who's the President and Chief Customer Officer at Braze. So let's bring them up now. Hey, Gali, how are you?
Hello, Beth.
Hi, Miles.
Hi, Beth. Hi, Beth.
Hi. Thank you guys so much for joining. I'm going to exit the stage and let you guys start it.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Beth. Hey, Miles, how are you doing?
I am well. How are you?
I'm well. So I'll start by introducing myself. So I'm Gali Arnon. I'm the CMO at Fiverr. I'm thrilled to introduce Miles Klieger, who is the President and Chief Customer Officer at Braze, which is an amazing platform for customer engagement. And I know for sure, because we are at Fiverr a very loyal customer for a while now. Today, we're going to talk about effective email marketing. Many small businesses owners believe that email marketing is actually an old school approach to engaging with your customers. But according to research, email delivers the best ROI for marketing. For each $1 spent, the average ROI is $38 actually. Clearly, this method of communication is here to stay. If implemented properly, an email marketing strategy will gain you new customers and dramatically increase repeat sales. Today, we will review the importance of content, segmentation, optimization, automation, and the channels you should explore to get the most out of your email marketing strategy. So, Miles, before we dive in, maybe you give us a bit of introduction about yourself, your background, maybe about Braze.
Sure.
For those who don't know.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And I know it's pretty late in the evening for you. So thank you for staying up late for everyone who's tuning in. But yep, I'm Miles Klieger. I'm the President and Chief Customer Officer here at Braze. As you said, I am based in New York, where Braze is actually headquartered in New York City. And what we are is a customer engagement platform, as you said, helping brands fundamentally build better relationships with their customers through more effective communications and marketing, which obviously we're going to talk about today. And email is a big part of that. But email is one of many channels that you can use to build better relationships. And as far as my role and background, so I lead all of our go-to-market functions. I've been with Braze for coming up on 6 years now. It's been a very, very exciting journey. We started as a tiny little company with big aspirations in New York, and now we're north of 600 people globally. We have about 1,000 customers, and one of the things that and part of my job as Chief Customer Officer, of course, is to talk to a lot of our customers like yourself and others and get insights from what they're doing, what's working, what's not working. Which I find to be a lot of fun, and we have the benefit of a tremendous amount of data at our fingertips as well. So across our 1,000 customers, which range from SMBs all the way up to big giant enterprises, we have north of 2.3 billion monthly active users. So our customers interacting with emails, push notifications, mobile applications, websites every single day all around the world. So we have a ton of data and insight around what works, what doesn't work, so on and so forth. So excited to touch on some of those things here today, and happy to connect with people afterwards and follow up and start new relationships from here.
Awesome, great. So let's start talking about content strategy, okay? So, and actually before we dive into strategy, I think it's important to address the idea of relationship building in marketing. How can you develop a healthy and authentic relationship with your customers while also trying to convert them for your business? Doesn't it contradict? How do you combine the two?
Yeah. I think that's why we get paid the big bucks in marketing, right? Is to figure out how to answer that question. Because you're right, they're somewhat, on the surface, they're diametrically opposed in the sense of you're trying to build a relationship, but you're also trying to sell someone something either now or later. in some way, shape, or form. And I think that intersection point is obviously the most critical thing to figure out for any brand. But this to me is a great place to start a conversation like this around effective strategies and things like that. Because at the end of the day, I personally, and I think others would agree with me, would say that really, relationship building is the purpose of marketing, and it always has been from the origins of life and marketing. So that hasn't changed, but a lot of things have changed around us, certainly in the recent years, and a lot of those changes have been driven by technology. So brands are still trying to build relationships with their customers. You still have this kind of conflict, as you were referencing, between selling someone and kind of adding value and building a relationship. And I think what makes it harder and also more exciting for brands is that now, because of the advent of technology and everything that's happened, you've got some changing dynamics. Like, people are basically the same. A lot of the things that we're trying to sell them have changed, but the reality is that the consumer has more choice than ever before, more control than ever before, and and I would argue higher expectations than ever before of the brands that they do business with. And that includes marketing, because every marketing message you send someone or ad you send someone is a reflection of the brand, and either you're building equity through that and building a relationship, or you're destroying it. And the reality is that when you do it right, you've got huge upside and a lot to gain, and brands have so much more tools available to them at their disposal now to build those relationships. But because the expectations are higher and because people have more choice, I think the downside risk of doing it wrong and offending people, or being tone deaf, or selling them something that they don't want, the downside is higher as well, because the switching costs are lower for so many people. And I actually saw a stat recently that I wanted to reference now, which is that 90% of consumers in a study that was published last year by the Info Group said that they're annoyed when they receive messages that are not personally relevant to them. So in a world where they can switch to something else quite easily, certainly in a digital context, you have to put an even bigger onus on making sure that you're adding value through all of these interactions and messages.
So, and this leads me to my next point exactly. So do you have some practical tips of how to make mass campaigns? I mean, when we do campaigns, even though we use segmentation, it's still, campaigns in scale, right? They're massive campaigns.
Yep.
Depends on how large the business is. But how do you make those, this content? How do you make those emails, those notifications feel personal and individualized? How do you do that?
Yeah, lots of tips, and certainly plenty of insight to share on that. Before I even get into that, I just want one more kind of macro point, I guess, that I'll make before we get into the practical stuff is on this notion of building relationships and the importance of it. One of the things that we at Braze take really seriously, and we actually, it's our mission as a company for the technology that we build, is to actually make the messages in this world where more and more of the interactions we have with our customers are digital, which I know is obviously a big theme of the event today. In that kind of world, how do you make your interactions still feel human? Because people still crave human connection and human interaction. And this gets to this concept of personalization and relevance and value, because you want your digital messages to feel personal, relevant, helpful, constructive. And if you do that, they can feel almost like a conversation between two people who know each other. So this notion of personalizing the brand or personifying the brand. If the brand is like your friend, the brand is not sending you things that only the brand is interested in when the brand is interested in them. The brand has a sense of who you are, what you want, what you need, where you are, what's going on in your life. And then the messages they send you feel like almost responsive in nature. So philosophically, we believe that that's a critical element of success in this world that we were just talking about a minute ago, with more choice and more control and higher standards. And then the question becomes, how do you do that? And obviously, technology plays a huge role in it. And, from a personalization perspective, just to kind of, there's like the really basic, easy stuff. And then there's like a lot more advanced, sophisticated stuff. So the easy stuff, like using people's names, using people's locations, using kind of past information you have about them in terms of interests that they've shared, using any behavioral data you've collected around purchase history, or if you're in the content business, what videos are they watching? What articles are they reading? You get this tapestry of insight about people. And as you start to weave more and more of those pieces of data, frankly, into your strategy, that is what unlocks personalization in the way that really provides value. And we see kind of, across our business, I mentioned we have, we send billions and billions of messages, and we see across the board a 31% conversion rate uplift when you use any form of personalization in the messages that you send. So I can't underestimate how important this is. And unfortunately, a lot of brands don't do nearly enough of it. And a lot of it is quite simple as long as you have the right tools and you embrace the philosophy and the strategy around the importance of doing it. So I'd say, that at the core is critical. And then just kind of one more metric I just want to point out that I also think is really interesting is when you go beyond that kind of the basic personalization we were talking about before, and you start to do more advanced things like use triggering to send messages based on behaviors. Across our customer base, we're seeing 267% higher conversion rates when you're using behaviorally triggered campaigns versus just scheduled time-based campaigns. So the lift might be there, but the payoff is there too. And in this world where people expect more of you, if you're not doing it, they're going to go find someone else.
So from what I hear from you, if I want to kind of summarize what you said, is one, just give the customer a feeling that you know him or her, know what they're looking for, what's relevant for them,
Yep.
Make it more personalized. At the same time, use behavioral events in the customer journey, right? Just respond to things that are happening to your customer through the engagement with your brand. And then I guess the last thing is be authentic. Don't try to, use big words. Don't try to be what you're not. Use your brand personality and bring it to life. Is that kind of...
Very, very well said. It's exactly right. And kind of wrapping all of that up is this notion of being human. And I think being human kind of encompasses all the things that you said. And, tone matters and consideration matters, timing matters. Like if someone tells you they don't want to receive a message in the middle of the night, don't send them a message in the middle of the night. That angers people in many cases. So you have all these different signals out there that give you a sense of people's interests, preferences, and then you can apply it. And then there's very basic ways to do it, and there's more sophisticated ways to do it. The more sophisticated you get, the better the results are going to be. But even with the most simple actions around the principles you were just describing, you're going to see significant improvement in performance.
Great. Awesome. So with everything, taking everything to mind, but, sometimes you still just want to convert. So this is, many times the objective behind your campaigns. And we have a lot of business owners and people who run businesses, and this is what you want to get by your campaign. So any tips for developing strong call to actions, anything that will make your customer engage more with your messages or react to them in a better way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a hard question to answer in the sense that there's no, one size fits all answer to it by any stretch. Every business is different. Every customer is different. And I think there's that, obviously that there's the art and the science of it. And the art is what creative professionals have been doing forever and are getting better and better at. But when you take the science of the data and you start to marry that with the art, is when you can really unlock value. And what we really kind of emphasize to every client, regardless of what business they're in, is put the customer first, put the customer's interests first. Think about how to add value. And sometimes value could be making someone laugh or smile. Sometimes value could be telling someone really valuable information about your product. Sometimes it could be, an offer that's really compelling. But if you think about the customer first and you think about value, in the long run, you're going to have higher conversions. And then what we really emphasize also with certainly with our clients, but in general, is the importance of testing. because you have hypotheses. We have ideas. We might have a variety of different offers. We might have a variety of different message types we could send people, cadences. There's no shortage of things that you could do. And the question is, what works best? So test, and technology now makes it relatively easy to test and learn and optimize. And one of the things that that I always talk to clients about too is that in some cases, by the way, you might find that sending no message is actually the better choice in terms of driving higher conversion. But you have to figure out who is sensitive to messaging, who is not sensitive to messaging, who doesn't like your messaging, who loves it, who loves frequent messaging, so it gets to this notion of everyone is different. So you're really dealing with big groups, to your earlier point, of individuals. And the more fine-grained you can get in your understanding of the audience, then the smarter you could get in your strategies, and then your conversion rates are going to go up.
So testing, optimizing, and then you don't have one CTA for all that fit all. You need to also optimize and test a personalized approach for CTAs. This is what you're saying, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, like we've seen this in a variety of different industries where there's subsegments of audiences who are just they hate receiving messages from brands, and they don't so either they're going to opt out, they're going to unsubscribe, or maybe they'll get annoyed and go away. So figure out who those people are, and then don't send them messages. Interact with them another way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you mentioned the scale of data and the magnitude of data that is going through the Braze platform. This is why, again, I want to take you to the more practical tips. So from your experience, is there an optimum email length, or it doesn't need necessarily to be an email, but are there any rules for that?
We haven't seen any conclusive data on this. What I can say, and I actually earlier in my career, I spent a lot of time working in social marketing, and there was a strong correlation between the length of posts and engagement rates and conversion rates. I think that's also the case in other short form media like push notifications, for example. When it comes to email, I don't think there's anything conclusive around it. What I would say on that topic is stop when you've finished adding value to some extent. Instead of going on and on.
That's an easy one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to remember that. I think the most recent statistic I saw on this, I don't have the source handy right now, but I think 76% of emails are viewed on mobile devices now. So think about that. So where is your audience consuming the message? If you have a really dense, copy-heavy email and someone's reading it on a phone, on the go, or wherever, they're probably not going to read all of it. So think about that. And of course, you can use technology to version. You can also have different versions. You can have desktop versions of emails. You can have mobile versions of emails. So that's another way to test and optimize and learn. And when you look at length and format, but I would say in general, shorter is better. I think people have shorter attention spans than they used to. I know I do. And using images and multimedia as well can be really effective as opposed to just copy. And this is different than I think in the early days, when you think about direct mail pieces and other forms of long form content, you had an opportunity to say a lot, and people were a captive audience. And this gets back to the idea of how are they consuming your information. So if they're reading a magazine or sitting on the beach or whatever, chances are you have their attention. But if they're on their way to work, on a train or something like that, they're probably scanning through a bunch of stuff. So you have to do something hard-hitting quickly to get their attention and add value.
Marshall McLuhan once said that the medium is the message.
Right.
It's exactly that, right?
Yeah.
So know your medium and then know how long should be the message.
Exactly.
And then last thing about content strategy, let's say I written an email or any other kind of message. It's engaging, it's personal. How do you ensure people actually see and open your email? I think this is a big problem that a lot of marketeers are dealing with. I mean, how do you stand out with this incredible amount of brands that are competing over your attention?
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I can't believe I'm using this phrase again because it's been out there so many times. It's relevant or it's pertinent for this question, but this like now more than ever concept, because I mean, think about how many emails you've received from from brands in recent months, given what's going on.
Oh my God. It's effective now.
Exactly. And we're all, with all the different apps we download and newsletters we subscribe to and loyalty programs we join, it's only increasing the amount of the volume of messaging that's coming through. And I think there's been this interesting sort of change also in the dynamic, in that you've got like personal space and you've got brand space, right? And like the whole notion of using SMS for marketing was taboo for a really long time because that's where people talk to their friends, certainly in the US. And obviously that's migrated to platforms like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. And then brands are starting to like encroach on those spaces. And it's like the advantage is you're like woven into the natural conversation where it's happening, but it's a little jarring. And email has been interesting because you've had, it was about 2 years ago or maybe more. I can't keep track of time anymore, but Gmail was the first to try to attack this problem by creating kind of the primary tab and the promotions tab and the social tab. And then they were trying to basically figure out which of your messages were things that are most important and should be in the primary box. Maybe they're work related, maybe they're friends or whatever. And then which things were promotional in nature and should actually be filtered into a different view, so they're not interfering with your main views. So that's kind of I think that was a really important innovation in the in the space around the platforms, the ISPs starting to kind of make some of those decisions for you and start to automatically put things where they think they belong. And a lot of brands have been we hear this all the time. We have like an email deliverability practice, and one of the main things is email deliverability, making sure you don't end up in spam is kind of the first part, and actually IP warming, for example, is a really important part of that, depending if you have your own dedicated IP that's whitelisted or if you're using a shared IP, which certain providers have. So if you have your own IPs, you need to make sure you warm them properly. Otherwise, the like Gmail and Hotmail and Yahoo might think they're spam, and they'll just put them into the spam folder, and then you're in big trouble. It takes long time to dig out.
Blacklisted.
Exactly. So step one is just like getting the deliverability piece down. But then once you got that, once your IPs are warm or using shared IPs, then it's this kind of the other part of your question, which is like, how do I actually make sure that people see my emails? And interestingly, a lot of brands, certainly in the early days, once Gmail introduced the promotions folder, there was this like a bit of a taboo on that too, where it was almost like if you were put in there, that was a bad thing because no one was going to see your emails because people are just focused on their primary channel, or tab. But that's actually not true. And what I think Google found over time is that consumers actually appreciated this because they were, you were basically separating the wheat from the chaff, or whatever that saying is. And it was almost like back to what I was saying earlier around this jarring nature of brand messages interrupting my personal space. It's like when I'm doing my work or talking to my friends, my view is here. When I want to see what's going on with brands, I go there. And actually a lot of brands were seeing really good performance and better conversion rates by being in the right place at the right time. So the promotions tab is not a bad place to be as long as you sort of embrace it properly and understand how to use it. There's still a lot of brands out there that really aspire to be in the primary tab, and we can't control Google's algorithms. But what we can do is make sure that we're sending relevant content, that we're doing it on a timely, predictable way, because the algorithms look for that type of stuff too, to make sure because every time you click and engage, it influences the algorithm in terms of relevance. And then if you're engaging more frequently with certain brand content, then it might find its way into the primary tab, which could have some advantages for you. So you can't control for these things, but engagement is really what dictates all of it. So if you send smart messages that are creative, interesting, relevant, sent at the right time, and then on a cadence that makes sense. So you're not oversending, you're not undersending. Your likelihood of both being seen and getting placed at a high, prominent spot within the promotions tab at a minimum is good. And then also, potentially ending up in the primary tab, just based on engagement and their conclusion that this is probably some pretty important content.
Wow, those are really, really great tips. I have to admit that even I learned some new things that I didn't know. Yeah. And I felt like I know a bit about it, but still, no, it was fascinating.
You know, before you go on, just thank you for saying that. But I've long published some content about this a while ago, but I've long expected. I'm still waiting for it to happen, but for iOS and Android at some point to really do similar things from a push notification perspective. They started to do it with the last few releases where they give the consumer a lot more control around different types of push notifications, what's transactional, what's promotional, what's personal, so on and so forth. But they all still basically appear in the same feed, in the same notification center, versus kind of creating a true separation with different views and tabs and things like that. And I think it may not be long before they eventually do that. And then to me, the more provocative question is, does it ever go the way, and email could be part of this too, but does it ever go the way of, email's already kind of there, I guess, in some ways, of like pay for play, like the social platforms did, where you couldn't get your content in the native feed anymore unless you were, paying to amplify or promote it. Otherwise, it was going to end up somewhere else that people may never see. So, that could happen at some point. I don't know. Hopefully, but it could.
We should get prepared. This is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
All marketeers. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So let's talk a bit about optimization. We talked about content strategy. I think one of the amazing things about the technology that exists today in the world of customer engagement is the ability to optimize. And you talked about personalization. Obviously, in order to use personalization, the basis for that is segmentation.
Right.
So I wanted to ask about your view about segmentation, but even more importantly, to really try to understand what are the most important dimensions or consumer behavior or metrics that marketers should segment by. Because I think, eventually, when you're doing segmentation, you could get to endless kind of clusters of consumer groups, right? Or consumer segments. How do you choose the most important one? And how do you know which one to use, right?
That's a great question. And I think you introduced a really important point there, which is that at some point you get diminishing returns, right? Where it's like, if you create so many different segments and they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and you have so many different variants, like at some point it's not worth the effort in terms of the incremental lift that you're going to get. So that's another place where you need to kind of test and figure out what that inflection point is. We really believe, though, that I think this crosses over into some of the stuff we talked about a couple of minutes ago, as you said, because personalization is obviously a function of segmentation, and you can segment and group people based on simple criteria like demographics, certain psychographics, where they live, what language they speak. I mean, that to me, it's like, if you're not doing that, you're making a big mistake, because not only do people expect that, it's like you're risking offending people if you're sending the wrong types of messages and you're ignoring different cultural differences, different time zones. At best, you're sending messages when people are sleeping. At worst, you're offending people. And actually, in certain countries, it's illegal to send messages during what they call quiet hours, and you have to make sure that you don't. Otherwise, you can get a big fine from the government. So there's that type of segmentation, which I would say is really table stakes, common sense stuff. And then there's like the behaviorally based stuff that we were talking about before, which is where it starts to get really interesting. And while I'm now gonna contradict myself in the idea of saying at some point you get these audience groups so small that it doesn't pay to kind of continue to refine them. But the reality is, I think every marketer should push themselves to think about segments of one at the end of the day. And the way you can do segments of one at scale with automation is using behavioral triggers and behavioral signals, so that you could have a segment of people that all fit a certain set of criteria, and that's been defined and established. But the reason it becomes a segment of one is that each individual person becomes eligible to either receive that message or not receive that message based on what they do or don't do. So you can set one segment that has a bunch of rules in it, but not everyone is going to automatically receive the message unless they also take a certain action. or they
Can
don't.
Can you give a practical example? So, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think the best example of that could be like even an abandoned cart kind of situation where you could set up a rule that you're gonna, like, people who spend more than $200 with me in the last month, who have visited my website more than 6 times, who are female between 18 and 34. You could have all those criteria defined, and that might be an audience of, I don't know, call it 100,000 people, and that's an important audience for you to talk to. But then you could set up a campaign that is tied to creating basically an abandoned cart message for that person, maybe with an offer, or it could be, maybe even actually a better example would be like a lapsing user kind of thing, where you set up a set of criteria where if someone hasn't purchased from you or visited your site or read an article or watched a video in at least 6 months and they meet all these other criteria, that's an audience that you want to try to send a message to get them to come back. But not everyone is going to receive that message at the same time. When they enter that segment is when they pass that 6-month mark, or when they haven't, clicked on something or taken a certain action. So basically what the tools are doing are using kind of that behavioral automation and triggering to take a big group and then figure out precisely whom to send that message to or not at a specific moment. So it allows you that flexibility of segmenting according to a bunch of different criteria, but then really ultimately thinking about that audience as a whole group of individuals.
So basically what you're saying is to use criteria in order to create a segment, but then also to respond to different events, hopefully in real time, right? Because there's a big difference if you do it in real time or not, right?
Absolutely.
And we can talk about it as well, because email is kind of a channel that has latency kind of, as part of the nature of this communication channel. While when you use push notifications or even messages on the product itself in platform, you can actually react immediately to everything that has happened. So, but basically what you're saying is that behavioral triggers are the most powerful one, right?
They are, and they're going to ensure that you're either sending the right message to the right person, or you're not sending a message, or you're making some other type of decision. And when you overlay those behavioral triggers with smart segmentation based on maybe some analysis you've done around, when you think about the demographic breaks and things like that, like you might have a really good sense of who your most profitable customers are, and they meet a whole bunch of criteria. So great, let's create a segment of those people. And maybe those are people that we want to reward and turn into loyal advocates. So we might have a whole series of message flows for those people, but exactly which one they receive and when they receive it should be based on their actions and their behaviors. And that's when you're going to get the best returns. And you could apply that to so many different stages of the life cycle. I mean, think about new user onboarding. You could set up a rule around a segment of people who maybe, if you're, let's say you're a music streaming service, and you know that when people have created a playlist, that's a really important step on their journey to becoming a loyal user. So you kind of set up a strategy around, how do I get people to create a playlist? And you could have a set of rules in a segment that says, okay, new users who joined, they've had at least 2 sessions in 4 days, but they've yet to create a playlist. So let me send them a message. So that's an example of a segment, but people are going to be moving in and out of eligibility to receive those messages and enter that flow based on, again, what they're doing or not doing based on their behaviors. And a big part of that is also what we call exception events, which is that you can pull people out of eligibility to receive that message if they took the action that you wanted them to take. So in the case of abandoned cart, let's say I made the purchase, you don't need to send me the reminder if I already made the purchase. So when I take that action, or in the music streaming example, if I create that playlist, I'm no longer in that segment based on that action because I did it. So if you send me a message telling me to create a playlist the day after I already created one, that's an example of a brand sending a bad message that shows me that you don't know who I am, you're not adding value, and that whole sort of effect we were talking about earlier, which can lead them to go use some other service. could happen there. So really important.
So basically, if I understand correctly what you're saying let's take a predefined segment. In this example, for example, new customers that are in the onboarding phase. Let's recognize or acknowledge or identify those most important triggers, right? So what are the things that will make them more loyal buyers in the future, or more loyal kind of customers in the future, right?
Yep.
And then let's make sure that we encourage them to take an action, but then also respond to this action.
Yep.
In order to become relevant and maybe take them to the next step in the journey, right? Or to the next phase in their customer journey.
It's exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly right. And it's a process, and it's a flow, and they call it a journey for a good reason, and it has different stages. So as soon as if step one is mapping out strategies let's talk about Fiverr for a second. If you want to get people to post their first, like creative job spec, let's say, where I need someone to do X for me, you might have a whole bunch of strategies around getting people to take that first step. Once they do it, then, like you said, then they've moved into the next phase of their journey. And now it's about getting them to do it multiple times. And maybe it's about getting them to bring 3 friends in, or whatever it may be. So as soon as they complete or convert off that first stage, then they automatically move into the next phase. And there's a whole new set of campaigns they might be eligible to receive. And guess what? They're no longer in that brand new user onboarding flow, because it's no longer relevant for them.
So they're moving to the next stage.
Correct.
So, we're talking a lot about optimization and segmentation. What data should you be analyzing to look for optimization opportunities? I mean, how do we approach this challenge of making sure we focus on the right thing and getting the right data?
Yeah, it's I think there's 2 parts to it. You've got your campaign engagement data. So did they open, did they click, so on and so forth. And that's important. But what's even more important is what comes before that, in terms of those key insights around figuring out, what are those actions I'm trying to drive. Because I know that if I get someone to do it, I'm going to have a much more loyal customer, or much higher likelihood of success, or so on and so forth. So that's that element of, what we would call product analytics, or in some cases just good old fashioned market research, where you talk to your customers and we work with a lot of food delivery companies, and it's if someone comes in for a free offer and they redeem that first offer, and then the brand doesn't see them again for 3 days, then it's almost guaranteed that person was just shopping around for free deals and offers, and they're just going from service to service to service. So they're trying to, they have all sorts of insights and analysis that they do on who are the right types of audiences, who are the wrong types of audiences, who are the ones I want to focus on bringing back, who are the ones I can let go away. So it's really a mix of those behavioral analytics, the conversion data, things like that, and then using that to inform these strategies. And then again, I'm sorry if I'm being repetitive, but I can't stress enough the importance of testing, where all of these things are hypotheses, and then you want to kind of take that to the next level and prove them out. And one thing that we're actually also focused a lot on at Braze from a product perspective is trying to use data science to also help predict and answer a lot of these questions. So, for example, analyzing, using machine learning algorithms to analyze big, sets of data, and then try to predict users who are likely to convert, likely to churn, so on and so forth, such that the marketer can preemptively send them a message to bring them back, or put a new type of offer or whatever it may be in front of them, to prevent a certain good thing from happening, or to prevent a bad thing from happening, or to encourage a good thing from happening. So that's kind of the next wave of where I think a lot of this stuff is going. But good old fashioned, just analyzing your customer data, your top of the funnel metrics certainly, but the bottom of the funnel metrics are even more important.
So the game is actually to combine a lot of data testing, right? But also consumer behavior, psychology, right? It's like
and feedback, and And if you're a small business, you may not have access to some of these tools and capabilities that I'm talking about here in some ways, but you still have a ton of data. If you're using Google Analytics, there's freeware out there. There's all sorts of products that'll give you insight into funnels and where people drop off. And I need to make sure that if they came to my website and they're an anonymous user, I have to capture their email on that first session. Otherwise, I'll probably never see them again. And I might have just wasted a bunch of money paying for Facebook ads to get them to come to my site in the first place. So what do I do to get in front of that? So it's, the more resources you have, certainly the more you can do. But all of these concepts we're talking about are really universally applicable to anyone.
And quite basic. So things that you can really practice even if you're not a very large business.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's move on to kind of talking about trends and additional channels. We talked a lot about emails marketing. Are there any additional channels that you can incorporate into your strategy to help generate more leads or increase conversion, improve retention?
Yeah, so a couple thoughts on that. So we're big believers in, as I mentioned at the top, the idea that email is a critically important tool, but it's one of many tools to engage users. And our data shows very, very clearly that when you use email alone, you can get great results. You mentioned a 38-to-1 ROI, fantastic. But what we see is that when you combine email with other message types, so in the first party channel universe, it could be SMS, it could be push notifications. It also could be now there's web browser notifications, which work like push notifications, but they're actually delivered if you don't have a native mobile app, for example, but you do have a mobile website or even a desktop website, you can get people to opt in to receive browser-based notifications, which work just like push notifications on a native iOS or Android device. So there's all sorts of other channels that you could bring to bear, and our data shows that when you do email with another channel, and another example of this could also be stuff in what we would call in digital products. So if I visit your website, maybe you can welcome me with a particular message that could be, it could take a variety of formats, but it could be tied to the email campaign you already sent me, directly connected to or not. It could be based on maybe something I read or looked at last time I came to the website. So there's also, like, when people already come to you, there's message types you can weave in. But at the end of the day, if you marry email with one more channel, we see 3 times better performance from an engagement perspective than just using email alone. And then we see if you add a third channel, you get 5 times greater engagement. And now over time, what we've seen is a full, I think 75% of our clients now are using more than one message type because they've really embraced this notion of multi-channel as critical. And it really gets back to what we talked about at the very top around making sure that your strategies match what your customers want. So, there's plenty, I don't really respond to email. So I get annoyed when brands send me a whole bunch of email. And one of the things that we've actually seen with a lot of our clients is they find that they can get higher revenue per campaign while sending fewer emails because they stop sending email to people who don't want it and they start mixing in some of the other channels instead. So that's another way to boost ROI because you're actually sending less email, which costs you less. You're mixing in some of these other channels, which in some cases can be less expensive because they don't carry CPMs and things like that. Plus, you can be improving your deliverability all while getting higher ROI on your campaigns. So if people are responding to your emails, you send them more emails by all means. But figure out who is more apt to respond to other message types. And then also, what are those journeys and connections of stitching together different messages? Back to the example with new user onboarding for Fiverr, and this is something we actually obviously work on with your team and many other clients, is you would want to have a multi-step flow where, let's say someone signs up for Fiverr, they don't post their first job, and a couple days go by, maybe you say, okay, let's send them an email and say, hey, thanks for joining. we noticed you haven't posted a job yet. It would be great if you did. Here are all the benefits. So now let's say 2 more days go by and they still didn't take action. Maybe they even clicked, but they still didn't post their first job. Maybe you then want to follow up with a push or an SMS, or maybe you even want to follow up with a paid ad, for example. You can do all of these things. So you can start to stitch together different experiences that are, again, really mapped to your client's actual behaviors and what they're interested in and converting on the most.
So basically what you're saying, and I can say, from my experience, that a lot of those lessons we actually learned at Fiverr, and it was exactly like you said. So multi-channel campaigns work much better than a single channel.
Yep.
That's for sure. You need to personalize the channels you use. So, use the channels according to the customers that respond to your messages in this specific channels, and create flows. So create multi-step campaigns,
right,
according to the response and the behavior of the customers.
Exactly. And back to what we were talking about earlier around the modifying the format of the different messaging for the different channel types too. That's critical here too, because you don't want to make, if you remember back to the old, like the original banner ad, and it's like people took like print ads and they put them on the internet, or TV ads and they put them on the internet when video pre-roll started and things like that. And that ignores the idea of using what's unique and special about the medium to actually create new experiences. So what you're doing in push should be very different than what you're doing in email, should be very different than what you're doing in products, because they're all different mediums and channels. And what's kind of cool is there's been so much innovation around making some of these other formats more interactive too. So you've probably noticed, like in push notifications now, you can take action in the push. You can sign up for something, you could tip a driver, you could rate a restaurant right in a push. I don't need to go and open the app and spend 10 minutes. That's great. That's a great consumer experience. So thinking about how to take advantage of those types of innovations is really important.
So if we talk about innovation, have you noticed any new trends in marketing automation from a technology perspective that you're excited about?
For email specifically?
For emails, for marketing automation, for customer engagement,
so,
anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, so overall, I'd say, a couple things. One is the continued evolution of the mediums and the formats that we're talking about now, where you can bring new interactivity. There's actually a somewhat recent innovation in email that was launched, kind of was in beta last year, and then I guess it probably went GA by the end of the year. But that Google again was behind something called AMP for email, which is basically if you think about how sometimes now if you search for a flight on Google, you can actually like check the fares and the schedule like right on the search results. You don't have to then go to the website to do it. So they took that same technology from search and they actually brought it into email now, specifically in Gmail, such that I can take action. I can have an interactive experience all within the email. I don't have to click and go to the website. And that was probably the first major technological innovation in email in 20 years. And it's been really powerful to see brands start to take advantage of it. And we actually have a client that works in the healthcare industry called Babylon Health, and they do a variety of different telehealth things. But they just recently rolled out a campaign and they tested kind of AMP for email creative against more static creative. And they got 56% more engagement on the interactive experience. And it's super cool because like it's all about kind of like a diagnostic assessment of your body and your health. And they had this like 3D visual of a body that you can move around. And then they got 20% more conversion of people signing up for this new service that they were offering because they offered a better experience. So that to me is super cool. So we're going to see more, I mentioned some of the things happening in push. So there's more innovation there. I think just even at the more basic level, the idea of being able to get more and more sophisticated in these strategies and journeys and bring more real-time data to bear is so important as we've been talking about. And I think up until now, and depending on what tech you're using in a lot of cases, the idea of like creating even a segment the way we were talking about it earlier is that by definition, it's a static snapshot moment in time where you're looking backwards because it's like a certain set of criteria are true. So then, okay, tell me the people who meet those criteria. So it's already in the past, and people are out every day, you know, every moment they're doing different things now more than ever. So how do you marry sort of that historical snapshot with real-time engagement in order to be more conversational and human, like we were talking about? And you can only do that by this notion of like having people dynamically move in and out of segment eligibility based on behaviors. And that's so important. And that kind of stuff really wasn't possible before. It's data streaming at its simplest that's driving that. So I think it's the platform innovation, it's the data streaming. And then the third thing is some of the machine learning things I was talking about before, right? I think you're going to see a lot of innovation around who should I be talking to, what channel should I be using. So, you know, if I can send someone a push and an SMS and an email all at the same time because they've opted in for all three, which one should I send? I don't need to send all three. Which one's going to convert the best? So kind of making a decision like that. And then potentially getting into the what should I send them? What type of offer? Can you get dynamic with that too? So those are all the areas that I'm watching from a tech perspective.
It seems like it's going to be super interesting, right? The future is going to be super interesting. Okay. So we have 10 more minutes and we can't just talk about email marketing or our communication in general, without talking about, you know, the current climate and everything that's been going on. It's actually clear that brands today use emails and communication in general with their customers more than just a need to know info. In today's climate, there's a push to use communication in order to communicate the brand purpose, ethic, and even give, you know, inside information on upcoming business decisions that align with those ethics or ideals.
Yeah.
How do you predict brands will approach email marketing campaigns differently in 2021? It seems like, you know, if we started from just trying to convert our customers and lead them to the next action that we want them to take, it's now, you know, especially in the last few months with COVID-19 and with the Black Lives Matter movement, it seems that brands are using those means in order to communicate on a much larger kind of spectrum of messages. How do you think the future will look in this aspect?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think the idea that like with email just being such a pervasive, you know, most brands have much bigger email opt-in lists than they do, you know, recurring unique visitors to their website or active users on their mobile apps or things like that. So when you think about sort of first-party channels where you've got opted-in permission to talk to people, and you know, and now like especially with like all these new creative formats we've been talking about and things like that, and getting smart about deliverability, and like you have an opportunity to reach a lot of people through email that you couldn't reach in other ways without having to pay for them. Like obviously you can go buy a TV ad, you can go do a big social blitz campaign or something like that, but email is a very high reach, dependable vehicle or, you know, or channel for brands to use when they have something to tell you as a customer. And I think what we all saw, and I would actually say you're right, it's like, you know, COVID flowing into Black Lives Matter, but like if you even go back to last year, like GDPR, like think about all the messages, you know, and some of those obviously were like required, mandatory messages that you had to send to people. But I think we're sort of in this new phase of kind of like email announcements of companies and like this like importance of transparency now, and brands telling people not just about sales and offers, but about who they are and what they represent and what their positions are on things. I think that's only going to grow. It has to, and that's a good thing. But you know, and email will continue to be a vehicle that a lot of brands use to tell that story. I would caution though brands to be true to their voice, as we talked about in the beginning, and make sure that you're as much as these are such critically important topics around the world that everyone needs to engage with and comment on. Like, there's a time and a place for everything. And I think the brands that we're sending out, with all the COVID messages you got and all the BLM announcements that you got, like, some of them made a ton of sense because of the company and like the role they play in your life. Like, if I'm a gym, it's pretty important that I reach out to my members and I tell them what's going on. We're closing for X number of months. Here are the protocols we're putting in place for cleaning, so on and so forth. If I make, lawn chair furniture and you bought a chair from me 5 years ago and never ever came back and you're still opted into my email list, I probably don't care as much about your position on, COVID-19 safety, and I'm probably going to tune that message out. So I think some brands were kind of, whereas the medium will continue to be used and gain more importance, and I think can be more and more powerful with the format. I think because of that, back to what we talked about an hour ago around expectations, I think people are just smarter and more aware of things, and they kind of want when you send them a message, they want it to have a purpose and a point. And if it doesn't make sense, they might be like, this is just really weird. And there were a lot of like articles written on the internet and silly Twitter posts, of course, about the most ridiculous emails that people were getting from brands about COVID or BLM. And it's dangerous now to do stuff that is just tone deaf or wrong or off or just irrelevant.
Yeah. So, and I'm not sure there is an answer for that, because, I guess a lot of marketers are actually struggling with that. But is there any advice you can give of how to actually communicate with your consumer base in times of crisis in a more authentic and a real way? Because just like you said, there was so much criticism around brands that, with this furniture company that you gave this example, I mean, all of a sudden you get an email and, emotional email from the CEO about his position about COVID and the safety of his consumers. What is your advice? How do we, how to make sure that our voice will become authentic and real?
Yeah. I mean, it's a deep question. I think I'd say two things. One is, or maybe three things. One is like stop and think. So it's like, before I send out that communication to everyone, like, just ask yourself those questions. Like, why am I doing it? Does it make sense? Is it relevant? Is it going to help? Is it going to hurt? Is it information people need to know? Hopefully the answer is yes to a lot of those questions. And even in the case of the furniture company, I mean, there might have been certain circumstances where it does make sense for them to reach out and communicate. But I think you just need to not follow the herd and just assume that just because everyone else is doing it, unlike GDPR, where you were legally required to do it, in this case, you're not, and you just have to be more thoughtful about it. So I'd say that certainly should be the first step. Second step is really understanding your customers around, do they want and expect this stuff from us? How have they reacted last time we did this? So a lot of brands probably should have learned lessons with what's going on right now. And like, what do you do with that information? How do you apply that to the next time there's a crisis? Because there certainly will be another crisis. So what can we do differently next time? So I'd say there's that piece of it. And then the third piece is also, I would say, like, back to segmentation. Like, can I find out a subset of my audience that actually does care about these things and does want to hear from us about these things? And then maybe there's a whole portion of my audience that doesn't, and you might have logical breaks on that. Like the example I used on the furniture thing. It's like, okay, maybe someone who has not visited my website in a year or 2 years, they're probably not an active customer of mine right now. They probably don't care. And if this is the first time I'm going to get in front of them in a long time, I don't know if this is the right message to do that with. So
is it authentic? Yeah, I'm not sure.
Exactly. It's like, is it human? Is it authentic? Does it make sense? And I think, the answer is going to be different for every brand, but that's actually, I think, the answer to the question is that don't do it just because everyone else is doing it. Do it because it's right and it makes sense for you, and you've thought about it.
So just like human being behavior, just do the right thing that works for you
right
at the right time.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you do it right, it could be a huge win, because if all the people that were getting made fun of on social, there were a whole bunch of other brands that were being completely applauded in social as being completely doing the right thing and really understanding the customer and taking a stand, and like you have an opportunity, but you gotta just stop and think and like you said, just be human, be smart.
Great. So I guess we need to wrap up at this point. I wanna say that this was fascinating. I thought I know a lot, like I told you, but it seems like I have a lot more to learn. Miles, it's probably gonna take a while until we're gonna meet each other, right, face to face.
Yeah.
Until we can travel, but up until then, it was an amazing session. Thank you so much for taking the time and participating.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for including me. And like I said at the top, if anyone wants to follow up with any questions, or I'd be happy to connect with people and be a resource. And we also at Braze.com, we have a ton of resources too, and content we publish and data we publish, and we're always doing things like that. So if people check out Braze.com or our social channels, please stay in touch. Thank you so much, and congrats on a great event.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you,
Miles. Thank you, Gali. Bye now.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.